So at this point, we have started to get a good grasp on the basics of modeling. So now I want to talk about how we can set up reference images in Blender to further aid us. Now, we've already covered how to snap between orthographic views in the 3D viewport by pressing 1, 3, and 7 on our numpad. Now we're going to use reference images that are drawn from these orthographic perspectives to aid in our modeling. And we're going to line them up in our viewport such that they match these orthographic views. Now, in order to use reference images, we need to know what type of image we are looking for. In the case for translating an object from 2D to 3D, we are looking for what is called a model sheet. This is sometimes also referred to as a turnaround. So if you go to Google Images and just search model sheet, the image results will show you something like this. A model sheet is a 2D drawing of an object or character that you want to model in 3D. And it is shown from the orthographic front and side views. Some model sheets will contain additional views such as the top view or a 3/4 perspective, but we need at least the front and side view in order to use it as an orthographic reference. Now, model sheets are not the same as concept art. So this image here contains both a concept and a model sheet. The concept is here on the left side. It is drawn in perspective at a 3/4 angle. It is fully colored and will often show the character in a pose that gives the viewer a sense of their personality. Whereas the model sheet on the right side here is drawn in clean lines from orthographic viewpoints and is designed to give the 3D artist as much information as possible so they can make an accurate translation from drawing to 3D model. Now for this next section, I will provide a model sheet for you to follow along with, or you are welcome to use one of your own. This is the model sheet that I will provide for this section of the course. I drew this model sheet several years ago for a character modeling course I did, so please forgive me, I am not a 2D artist by any means, but this will work for our purposes. So in the bottom left here, I have the original concept sketch. Now this character doesn't have a name or anything like that, but he's supposed to be like a janitor. The concept is a little cut off here, but he's got, a mop and a bucket. So we're going to be starting from this single image file. So the first thing we need to do to get this set up correctly in Blender is to cut this image up into separate views. Now, to do this, I'm going to open Photoshop. You do not need Photoshop specifically to do this. You can do it in a free alternative such as GIMP, and you could probably even do it in Microsoft Paint, because all we're going to be doing with this is cutting this up into separate views. So with Photoshop or your image editing software of choice, we're going to open the file. And you can see I have it right here in my recents. Oh, but I moved it, of course. So let's open the file. So to start this, I'm going to use the lasso select tool. And all I'm going to do is draw around this front image with my lasso select. Doesn't have to be super exact, it just has to get all of the front here into this. And now I'm going to copy this selection by pressing Ctrl and C. I'm going to open a new Photoshop file by going File, New. The default Photoshop size is fine. And now I'm going to paste my selection into this new file by pressing Ctrl and V. Now, you can crop it in if you need to. say about there. That looks pretty good. Enter. The crop tool in Photoshop, if that's what you're using, is right here, and you can pull it in. Now we're going to save this as a new image file. So we're going to click File, Save As. We're going to choose a location for it. In this case, just know where it is. And we're going to name it. Let's call this Front Ortho. And we're going to save it as a PNG. Now, it doesn't have to be a PNG. Blender can import most common image file formats, such as JPEG, Targa, but PNG is pretty universal. So save that out. And now all we have to do is repeat that process for these other views. So back in the original model sheet, let's lasso select around the side view. Let's Control C to copy. Let's make a new Photoshop document. Default is fine. Control V to paste it. Crop it in if you like. File, Save As, choose your save location, name it, let's call this Side Ortho, and change the file type to PNG. You can see I've already done this here, but walking through how to do it again. So last is this arm piece. Now I drew this arm floating away from the body because this front view is drawn in what is called T pose with the arms straight out, making a T of the body. So this arm is actually being viewed from the top. So let's just do the same exact process, but save this as the top image. So just lasso select around it, Control C, File, New, default is fine, Control V, crop it in as needed, File, Save As, let's call it Top Ortho, and change the file type to PNG. Okay, so once we have all of these views separated out into different images, we can close Photoshop. We don't need the program open anymore. If it asks you to save changes to the Photoshop document, you can hit no. We do not need to save these original Photoshop documents. All we need is the PNG files that we created. So now let's jump back into Blender, create a new scene, and we're going to press A to select everything, X, and then just confirm that delete. So now we need to add in our images. So in the 3D viewport, press Shift and A to bring up the Add menu, but we're not going to add a mesh. We're going to come down here and click Image. Now, you'll see that there are two types of images that you can add. There is reference and there is background. They're both pretty similar, but we can quickly go over the differences. So let's add a reference image. It will bring up your file browser in Blender. You just need to navigate to where you saved your PNG images. Let's pull up the front. Yes. Now you'll see that when you add a new image into Blender, it will add and it will be aligned based on your camera angle in the viewport. So because I was in perspective mode when I added this, it's kind of come in at a strange rotation. But just to fix this, because we want this is an orthographic view. So to have this in orthographic view, we can just hit Alt and R to clear the rotation. Now I'm going to hit RC90 to flip it that way. And I'm going to hit RX90. Oops, I mean RY90 to flip it. Oh, no, I was right the first time. X90. So that when RX and 90. So that when we hit 1 on our numpad to go into orthographic front view, it is facing us. Okay, so let me quickly repeat the process with a background image to show you the difference. Yep. Here, 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 and we're gonna pull up the same image for this. Okay, so this one on the left here is a reference image, and this one on the right here is a background image. So the only difference between these two objects is that a reference image will be opaque by default, and it will be visible from both sides, whereas a background image will be transparent by default, and it is only visible from the front. And right now it is only visible in orthographic view. If we enable perspective on this, we can see that this reference image is visible from both sides, and the background is only visible from one. However, we can change the properties of either of these two image types to meet our needs. So let's get rid of one of these. Let's just stick with our reference image. Just pressing Alt and G to clear the location back to the center. So let's look at the properties and how we can change some of this. So to change an image's properties, all we have to do is in the properties panel editor, come down to object data properties, which for an image will have this little image icon. Now let's look at some of these settings. There's some settings here for the size and the location of this, which you can also just set with your regular transform tools. So we're not going to cover those in depth, but we are going to look at some of these. So the depth setting is referring to how we want this rendered in relation to mesh objects in our scene. So let's add a cube really quick to see what that does. And let's move this back so they're not intersecting each other. So right now, depth is set to default. That means that if this image plane is behind this mesh, it will be rendered behind it. And if I press G and Y and pull it forward, and now look at it from the front, this image is now in front of this plane, or this cube, I should say, so it is being rendered in front. However, we can change this if we set the depth to front. Even if our image is behind this mesh object, it will always be rendered in front of it if we have this set to front. Likewise, if we have this set to back, it will always be rendered behind the mesh, regardless of our where it is in our viewport. So let's just set that back to default. So the next setting I want to look at is side here. Right now it is set to both, meaning that I can view this from the front and the back, and it will still render the image regardless of what direction I am facing. I can set it to front to have it only be visible from the front view. I can set it to back to have it only be visible from the back view. Let's set it back to both for right now. Now, if we change these show in properties, we can control whether or not the image is visible in perspective mode, orthographic mode, or both. Right now, both of these bubbles next to orthographic and perspective is checked. So that means if I am in perspective view, I can see this image in 3D space. If I am in orthographic view, I can see it in orthographic view. So obviously turning off perspective would make this image disappear from perspective view, but if I hit 1 on my numpad to go into orthographic view, it is there. And obviously the same is true if we enable perspective but disable orthographic. The image will be visible to us if we are in perspective mode, but if I hit 1, the image is no longer visible. So let's turn this back to both. Now, the last property I want to touch on is the opacity. Now, it is defaulted to 1 for a reference image because reference images are opaque by default. So all we have to do to change that is to enable the opacity bubble right here, which will give you access to this slider. With the opacity of 1, something that has an opacity of 1 means it is fully opaque. And sliding this down closer to 0, you'll see we'll give it some transparency. So you can customize your image settings in whatever way works for you, but I'm going to set this up the way that I like to set up reference images. So we have our first one in here already. So all we have to do is Shift A, add a new image, reference, and let's bring in our other views. So we've brought in our side view from the file browser. We brought it in perspective mode. So let's just hit Alt and R to clear that rotation. And let's hit RX90 and RZ90. I'm going to move this back a bit. And I'm going to lower the opacity. And last one, let's hit Shift and A, image, reference. Let's bring in the top. Let's hit Alt and R to clear that. And let's lower the opacity. And this one, we're going to have to scale it and rotate it a little bit more, just to match the relative size. So let's hide this cube for a moment. Let's actually unrotate this, just so we can layer these on top of each other. So we can try to eyeball the relative size of this arm. Lining it up with the front view arm. I'm just trying to get in approximately the same length, and we can adjust these at any point. Okay, so let's rotate this back. Alt R. The scale is correct, so do not clear the scale. RZ90. And with it, we roughly lined it up with this, so all we have to do, this one's not going to be over the center because that is not where we're going to model our arm. We're just going to push it. Actually, we're going to push it down to the bottom. So some people like to have all their image planes lined up right on top of each other in the center. Let me just show you what I mean by that. So let's duplicate these. Okay, so some people like to line them up this way. I mean, and obviously you could, you would spend more time getting this arm aligned properly, but so that all the pieces are right in the center, so that when you hit 1 and 3, they're lined up, and you can kind of almost see how the model will come together in perspective view. But I don't like to have all my planes in the center like this. I find it very busy, and it's difficult to see the model you're actually working on without hiding these planes, and I don't like to have to do that. So set it up that way if it works for you, but I prefer to have my images behind where the mesh is going to be modeled. So that is how you set up reference images in Blender. We're going to move straight into the demonstration for this. And for this demonstration, we are going to be modeling this character. Now, we haven't discussed sculpting or anything like that, so we won't be getting into these finer details like the wrinkles in the skin and the clothing. But rather, we're just going to get the basic shape of this character. So I'm going to pause the recording here, and when we come back, we will move forward with the demo of modeling this character.